This is Lisa Miller and Associates, Florida Insurance Roundup, your podcast on the people, issues, and regulations shaping Florida's insurance market. Now, here's Lisa Miller.
Welcome, friends. It was back in 2021 in the legislative session that we learned a very startling statistic from Florida's insurance regulators. Florida had at the time 7% of the nation's homeowners insurance claims, yet 76% of the nation's homeowners insurance lawsuits. When those statistics were presented to the Committee on Commerce in the House, jaws dropped and heads turned. And I can say today that those numbers have improved, as we'll learn in a few minutes. But the improvement in Florida's dysfunctional insurance litigation system only came about through a series of legislative reforms that began in 2019 and culminated in 2023. And many of our listeners participated in pushing those reforms, and I want to thank you for that. Chief among them, the end of the one-way attorney's fees for plaintiff attorneys. So how much better are things today as we begin the new year of 2025? Our guest on today's Florida Insurance Roundup is taking the lessons learned from Florida's litigation experience and the reforms, and he's trying to help spread them nationwide. Today on our show is Wesley Todd, CEO of CaseGlide, a Tampa-based litigation analytics and software firm serving the insurance industry. He's also a lawyer, and I often say that Wesley was ahead of his time, tracking litigation analytics when it really wasn't cool to do so. And he's been doing it ever since. So welcome to the show, Wes.
Thanks, Lisa. It's an honor.
And I want you to tell us, my dear, about your core business and how it looks at the data. And as you have a new policy paper, I read it today and had been looking at it over the past week as you were drafting it, based on your latest analysis of the changing property insurance marketplace. And before we get into the details of the policy paper, why did you feel the need to put this all out in more of a formal written statement?
Sure. Thanks, Lisa, for the opportunity. I know how many change makers listen to this podcast. And so this is a very important step to help get this message out there. What we sought out to do in 2013 was bring transparency to level the scales of justice in litigation. It was clearly that they had become unbalanced and that in Florida, the citizens were being forced to pay to a point that it almost became litigation funding, right? I mean, the amount of litigation in Florida, everybody's heard about it basically daily for 10 years. But what was missing was the ability to see what was happening, the ability to do something about it. And it was around that time when I noticed when I was practicing that the insurance companies and the law firms, the defense law firms, were communicating in emails and Word documents. And there was so much valuable information in there that could basically be used to answer any question about how to run a better insurance company. And then that the questions changed over the years because no matter how hard the insurance companies tried to control costs, to predict costs, the cost kept going up, right? And eventually that came to a point where not only did the insurance companies care, but lawmakers cared. And so when they looked into the data, what they wanted to know was what parts of this, these billions and billions of dollars, what parts are going to necessary repairs, policyholders, and what parts are going to the litigation economics, the plaintiffs' law firms, and all the experts that they had brought around. And what is a fair distribution of that? How can we look at this data and see how many cases are out there and why they're taking so long to close, why the plaintiffs, lawyers were pursuing litigation first instead of resolution, and what could be done about that. And so, we did that in Florida, and we were just very fortunate to have supporters like yourself, as well as dozens of insurance company clients that supported us in our primary objective, which was to help them make sure that they were running their litigation departments effectively, and then help them obtain historic reforms, the likes of which we have not seen elsewhere in the country. And on that latter point, I noticed that as soon as we finished, and Lisa, you and I both still have PTSD from the crisis in Florida, I noticed there was a national crisis going on. And it looked very similar. Sure, it wasn't hurricanes and roofers and public adjusters, but and there wasn't as many cases, but they were much more expensive. And I saw commercial auto all of a sudden become unaffordable and unavailable. And then I started seeing the same thing happen to casualty in the last couple of years. And I noticed that those same problems that were happening in Florida were now spreading nationwide. And I don't think that's anybody's surprise that's been around the country and seen the same billboards that we see in Florida every day and has seen the nuclear verdicts pop out every day. So I noticed that the key moment was when I would sit down with the customers and our software, which, a lot of people don't know this, but what it really is it's a place for the adjusters and the attorneys to do their work, and it helps them do their work. But the executives and the management look into what's being produced in that work, and they're able to slice and dice and see what's the emerging issues and who's performing the best and who's performing the worst, and how can I move the needle forward. I noticed that the same step needed to be taken nationally. People needed a standard from which to operate. Say, this is the information that we need on these cases. And with this information, we can now take steps to level the scales of justice just as a company, because we could start to invest in the things that, reduce premium and avoid the things that don't, better litigation. But also already, right, they're already talking about reform nationally, that it's a number one, priority for the industry. Well, we all know how that happened in Florida. That happened through transparency, through being able to explain which cost was going to good, which cost was going to waste, and what reforms would be needed to carve through that and make sure that we deliver the same value to citizens without the, citizens of the United States, without unnecessary costs and burden of the litigation problems and players.
So you're peeking around the corner once again. And I too read about national litigation trends. I was reading about PFAS, P, F as in Frank, AS, which are called forever chemicals, and the ensuing lawsuits that are going to be emanating from manufacturers and those that use those chemicals in their products. And the trend is frightening about what the proposed liability litigation will be with that particular topic. It reminds me of the days of asbestos. In the trucking world, commercial trucking world, I see in the legislature, and I listen to the advocates for trucker liability coverage, say very plainly they cannot find it and it's unaffordable when they do. And it is frightening to think that an accident, truly an accident with a semi-truck that could be very heinous and hurt a lot of people, turns into this, what we'll call a nuclear verdict. And I'll let you talk more about those. So this litigation data standard that you are, I'll say, preaching the gospel, and I think it's awesome that you're doing that. You're really doing your best to get insurance companies to work within a platform that we can pool our data, report our data, much like we do claims data to some other reporting portals. And when the time comes, or even proactively, go into various state legislatures and show them when we're talking about nuclear verdicts and these other outrageous awards that we see. Tell me more about how you see this working with this standard, and how I believe your company would take the leadership role in creating this platform, working collaboratively with companies, insurance companies all over the country, so that we can lead with data and not lead with anecdotes. How do you see it working?
The way that it works is one of two ways, right? We have companies that understand what they're going through right now, which we had in Florida. We had companies that sort of were the first, what's called early adopters, and they say, we need this litigation data to run our business better. And there are those companies. There are those companies that we're working with already that are already in compliance. And that's really on being on offense, right? So they're able to reduce their costs, avoid nuclear verdicts, things like that, right? They just have full transparency, and then the ability and the tools to impact what's going to happen in these cases, and the best lawyers that they can measure objectively. But there are many other insurance companies, just like there were in Florida, that need to capture this information from a defensive posture. Because even if they do not have the resources or the maturity to build a claims litigation department that compete with the plaintiff's bar, like some of the other insurers do, what they can do is be transparent about where this litigation cost is going for them. And in Florida, we saw that happen too, where there were some insurers that saw the importance of this, and they were further along, as the years went on with their ability to combat legal system abuse. And then there were other insurers who weren't. And eventually the legislature just said, we're going to have a data call. We're going to be data first, right? And they mandated it. And that required every insurer to be compliant so that they could be transparent, so that instead of being anecdotal, we could just look at the data and we could see this wasn't an experience shared by a dozen insurers that were using CaseGlide. This is an experience shared by all 50 or 55, which was a number for domestic property casualty insurers at the time in Florida. So, no matter where you're at in a maturity scale, the first step is to have a standard for how you're going to capture this information. And the insurance industry is different, and it's even different than it was 10 years ago, Lisa, and it's even different nationally than it is in Florida. Just different leadership and different experience, and there's people at different stages in their career. But all of them need to be able to see what's going on and do their best to tell that story and support the industry, because the industry doesn't print money. The industry does its best job to predict loss. In fact, the industry's not really obligated to control loss. Their number one goal is to predict loss. But with public policy, that runs up against a wall, because if that cost gets out of hand and the insurance industry can't justify how that cost can be fixed, then we have that problem that you alluded to in commercial auto and trucking, and that we had temporarily in Florida as well.
So, Commissioner Yaworsky, great American, incredible to know, really been a true leader in, I'll say, telling it like it is. He has what he calls and puts out, I think it's twice a year, the market stability report. And we haven't seen the January 2025 report, but when Commissioner Yaworsky addressed the House of Representatives in the swearing in kind of new members, they called it, I think, Legislator University or some such thing. And they had probably 20 different classes on different topics, water quality and transportation and public safety. And he taught a class that basically gave a briefing on Florida's property insurance market. And he said the statewide average litigation rate among all property insurance claims is now 10%. And when you take out all the metropolitan areas, it's about 5%. The Tri-County area, Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade, saw a 27.5% of its claims were litigated. Miami-Dade by itself had more than 1 in 3 claims litigated, which he said is an area of the state that had not been impacted by storm in over a decade. So there again, he's bringing the facts to the table, educating not only legislators about what the numbers are. And then he said, now we're in a state where we're like 49 other states that have a contingency-based structure that really encourages rationality in this space. And he said that our Florida's loss adjustment expenses for a litigated claim are 5 times higher than it is for a non-litigated claim. And he's just doing everything he can to expose that. And he's concerned about that. And we're seeing now, even with the reforms, that some of the litigation that's coming in the door to insurance companies is more about a higher severity, a higher claim amount that are being pursued by lawyers versus what I'll call just the vanilla claims that they were doing several years ago. So, Wes, if you were king for a day and you had the opportunity to standardize what, and I think it's over 2,000 property insurance companies that do business in our state, what is it that you would say to those CEOs, CFOs, chief litigation officers, whatever the executives are, and how can you help them get ready for what you're seeing peeking around the corner? Because as what happened in Florida is happening nationally, and we've got to get ahead of it. What would you say to them?
I would say that we were very fortunate to have such a strong, data-driven, and independent, truly independent, truly spoke for the people of the state rather than, the big industry or, typical people that fund elections. They made difficult decisions all along the way. They also did their best to be surgical and not go for the full reforms, and they made different steps along the way to try to be as thoughtful as they can so as to strike that proper balance between reform and consumer protection. And they continue to be years ahead of other states on this topic. So now they're already at this, they have a standard stage, right? And they're able to give you pretty good insights, as Commissioner Jaworski is able to do on a regular basis, which no other state that I'm aware of does. But even so, after you get to that standard, that enables you to get to another standard, which is a more real-time insight into that, right? So Commissioner Jaworski does his very best to explain what he can explain, which is a dramatically improving market, dramatically reduced litigation for Florida property insurance, and again, a stabilizing insurance market where other markets are seeing drastic increases in premium. Florida is not. What would benefit the state, if you think about rating agencies, reinsurers, is to be able to distinguish between the pre-legal reform risk, the pre-2023 reform risk versus the post. Because the story that even using the standard data set that they promulgated with SB 76 2 years prior to the reforms, the story that they tell is, even though you show drastic improvements, that still includes, in large part, pre-reform Hurricane Ian claims going through the system these last 2 years. So imagine if Commissioner Jaworski could describe how many post-reform claims have come through these past 2 years and compare those to prior years. What you'd see is the numbers are drastically improving, not just incrementally. And this would be information that, of course, will come out in due time, perhaps with this report, but perhaps with the next report, because they have a standard, but they still are about a year behind because of the way that data is collected on a statewide basis. And it's difficult to analyze and put a report together. So we do the best with what we can. And it's not like insurance moves that fast as far as, rating agencies and regulators and things like that. Like, they are looking at series of years, not just 1 year. But in this critical moment where the risk of insuring a Florida policyholder has drastically reduced, it would be great for us to have that next level of data, which is by how much, and being able to distinguish between the stuff we're still seeing from pre-reforms that really aren't relevant to today's risk versus the things we're seeing post-reform, which is really the biggest indicator of how much less expensive it could be to insure Floridians if that was the only data we were using, which is the most relevant data, but also a little bit difficult to get.
So let's just look at the universe of, say, circuits, for example. We have 67 counties in Florida, 14 or 15 circuits. You'll know all that better than I do. And it is very difficult to scrape that data, the term that I've heard you use, to even try to get the data that you're looking for circuit by circuit or county by county clerk's office, because there's no standard in our state. And I would conjecture there's no standard reporting information in any other state. So this is a huge task, Wesley, that you're trying to tackle and bring attention to, because while we as insurance companies can report into a litigation data standard portal, I'll use that term, we have to do this as the insurance industry because we can't find it standardized across all of the various judicial circuits. I know that in Florida. Can you comment on that whole, how all of them are so different and some classify property insurance suit as I don't even know. I've just looked at it peripherally, but there's just no systematic standard in our clerk's offices, et cetera. Can you comment on that?
Sure. Yeah, the data is not available publicly. It has to be there'll have to be an advancement. The public data of a court system will tell you about results-wise. We'll tell you about the 1% of cases where there was a actual outcome with a judge, a verdict. The 99% of cases that drive all of the, insights into it those are confidential settlements between an insurer, in property at least, an insurer and a insured and their attorneys. So there is no publicly available information. What I would comment on, you were discussing that this is a big move. For those of you listening, there will be a litigation data call in the next 3 years. It might be recommended by a trade group. It might be organic by a group of insurers where this problem becomes so big, or it might be mandated by legislatures. But as happened in Florida, where they were looking to dig into, Florida had SB 76, which was not litigation specific, but it contained all the litigation, and you could splice it out and you could see what was happening in litigation. Legislatures are not going to take up the industry, in my opinion, on meaningful reform outside of Florida until they see the data, just as what happened in Florida. And I believe that just from the conversations I've been having with industry leaders across the country, that there will be, not mandatory, but highly recommended capturing of a data standard similar, if not exact, to the one that I'm promulgating in the white paper. It's just a matter of when. And as I described earlier, it really comes down to when you take this on. If you take this on, if you say, oh, we should have this information about our cases because this is where all of our money is going, for the benefit of our premium, for the benefit of just running an operation. Maybe this wasn't, how it was in the past decades, but this is how it is today. Then, and you do this in 2025 as you should, then you will be able to not just use it to support legal system reform in 2 to 3 years, when as we all know, that process takes a long time. You also be able to use it to run a competitive business and actually differentiate and figure out how you can actually benefit from writing the right risk, not writing the wrong risk, and having a claims and litigation process where all the investment is made in keeping premiums down, as opposed to maybe keeping cases open or just not intentionally at all. So I'm really sort of just giving the industry a heads up that this is where we're headed, if we're lucky, right? I mean, otherwise it could be too late. It could be that insurance becomes unaffordable and unavailable in major lines like casualty, professional liability, just like we've seen in commercial auto, just like we saw temporarily in Florida. That would be worst case scenario, trying to avoid that too. But there will be this data call if we're all lucky and we are on the path to reform. And I'm just giving it to people early because I know how insurance works, so that they can start to work with it, start to understand, and most likely have their businesses running a lot better in the near term, particularly on this issue where all their money is going.
Just such a critical thinker, Wesley. I cannot thank you enough for sounding the alarm that this is coming. You are always peeking around the corner when it comes to litigation data, and analytics, and making sure we can be our best. Folks, we've had on today's podcast Wesley Todd, the CEO of CaseGlide. He's based in Tampa, and they specialize in litigation analytics and data. And they serve the insurance industry, but more importantly, that data gives complete transparency to regulators, policymakers, and change makers in the country. And we always learn something new when we chat with Wesley. So thank you for being here, Wesley, and taking time with us today.
Thank you, Lisa.
In our podcast show notes, we'll have a link to Wesley's company, and you can see some of the great things that they're doing. And we'll also have links to the news stories and other documents we referenced in today's program. We'd love to hear your perspective on the issues that we've discussed here today. And I'd like to know what your experience is and what you think we can do to improve how we as an industry show the data about litigation and to stop talking about it, but have the data to support what we talk about nationally. We want to hear from you, our great listeners who take the time to listen to our podcast and read our newsletters. And you can call us and leave your comment or question, and we will get back with you on air right here on the Florida Insurance Roundup by calling 850-388-8002. That's 850-388-8002. Or send me an email, Lisa Miller at lisamillerassociates.com. We hope that you'll follow us on our social media accounts, LinkedIn, Facebook, our Facebook business page, and of course, X, which was formerly Twitter. And be sure to hit like and follow on your favorite podcast platform so you won't miss a future episode. Please share this with your colleagues and friends on your own social media platforms and other channels. But let's just stay really close so that you stay in the know. Go to our website at www.lisamillerassociates.com. You can sign up there for our free newsletter and notification of future podcasts. So that's it for today, the Florida Insurance Roundup. Wishing everyone a happy new year. And I want to thank you for being a part of this program and all of the happenings at Lisa Miller & Associates, because we have a passion for policy and client success. I'm Lisa Miller, and until next time, stay safe.
This has been Lisa Miller & Associates Florida Insurance Roundup, your podcast on the people, issues, and regulations shaping Florida's insurance market. For more information on today's program, please visit us on the web at www.lisamillerassociates.com.